Oh, it feels like it's been years since I've sat here and led some long political diatribe. And oddly enough, we found out last minute that our guest was going to be late yesterday for the Community Voice program, or I would have done something yesterday, but I didn't have quite enough time to throw something together as far as gathering my thoughts and maybe getting an interesting news article to read yesterday, so we did an encore presentation of Friday's program, so apologies for that. Hope you did enjoy the program regardless. But today I did have enough time to prepare a little something for you, gather my thoughts, and kind of pick a direction to take the show in. Well, it is tax week. April 15th is the official Write Your Check to the Government Day. And I saw a very entertaining picture while I was carousing on Facebook yesterday. It was a picture of a check that someone had written to the IRS. It was their name had been marked out and the amount had been marked out, but it was a check, and on the check it said to Internal Revenue Service, and in the I don't write too many checks. I believe it's the for portion of the check where you can write down and what it's for. And usually your bank, if you have an online statement, for example, it will show what you wrote the check for. If you legibly, in my case, actually wrote something there, and in the for space it said for extortion, which I thought was rather clever. If I actually had one day when I have to write the IRS money, I'll be sure to write extortion in the for box. I encourage a lot of you to do the very same. Write extortion in the for box. I don't think you'd get in trouble, and if you do, I'm not going to be held responsible. Also, the views and opinions of the host are not necessarily those of Granite Communications or Tanner Health System on this program. I don't think we can say that quite enough. I am the objective newsman in the morning, and I turn my chair around a couple of times so I'm dizzy and do a political talk show a couple of times a week. The voice of Adam Uglum here, hosting the Community Voice. And today there's a couple of things I want to talk about. One of those obviously being taxes, considering that it's tax week, and fiscal policy, which is certainly nothing new when it comes to my programs. It seems to be an avid interest of mine. Why, I'm not sure. But there's someone I would like to introduce you to. His name is Borg, is his last name. I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce his Swedish first name. Anders, I believe. Anyway, when Europe's finance ministers met for a group photo, it was pretty easy to spot the one who stands out, considering that Borg has a ponytail and an earring, which what really marks him out, though, is how he responded to the crash when it came to the EU fiscal crisis and the global recession that we're in right now. While most countries in Europe, like Greece, Spain, Portugal, a lot of these countries in Europe, they all borrowed massively in order to stimulate their economies. The finance minister of Sweden decided not to. Since becoming Sweden's finance minister, his mission has been to pare back government. His stimulus to the economy was a permanent tax cut. 3 years on, it's pretty clear who was right. If you look at Spain and Portugal, or the UK even, whose governments were arguing for large temporary stimulus, he says, well, we can see that very little of that stimulus actually went to the economy, but they are now stuck with the debt either way. Tax cutting in Sweden, by contrast, had the fastest growth in Europe last year. Also the same year that it celebrated the abolition of its deficit. Everybody was told, stimulus, stimulus, stimulus. We're all Keynesians now. That's me saying that part, but referring to the European Union in particular and the IMF and the alphabet soup of agencies urging a global debt-fueled spending splurge, Borg, an economist, couldn't work out how this would help. He says it was surprising that Europe, given what we experienced in the 1970s and 1980s with structural unemployment, believed that short-term Keynesianism could solve the problem. He continued to cut taxes and cut welfare spending to pay for it. He even cut property taxes for the rich to lure entrepreneurs back to Sweden. The last bit was the most unpopular. But for Borg, economic recovery starts with entrepreneurs. If cutting taxes for the rich encouraged risk-taking, then it had to be done. Borg still thinks government is too large in Sweden, but as I mentioned earlier, tax cutting in Sweden led to Sweden having the fastest economic growth in Europe last year. For good or for bad, there's plenty of saltwater Keynesians who will say, oh, well, it's not going to last, or whatever, but obviously the stimulus spending didn't have any short-term effect, and if Keynesianism is supposed to be this borrow now for political reasons so we can stimulate the economy and get quick political gains from it, which is exactly what Keynesianism is and is exactly why Keynesianism is popular among politicians, because You can say in an election year, even if things are bad, you can say, look what I'm doing. Here I am, borrowing money, creating a jobs program. It's the New Deal. It's the Affordable Health Care Act. It's the stimulus package. It's politically wise to be able to have something to stand on when it comes to a re-election bid, because you don't have anything to stand on otherwise if you're a politician who relies on Keynesianism to win your election. Especially if you're a president who is largely the one who is blamed for the economy. Why, I'm not sure, but we can get into that some other time. Interestingly enough, on the topic of Keynesianism, before we start talking about income taxes for the rest of the program, there is one bit I would like to share from a very, very intelligent man that I like to read quite frequently, named Thomas Sowell. And this is from his Random Thoughts column, and I thought this observation that Thomas Sowell has made was absolutely irresistible. He says, quote, "People who believe in evolution in biology often believe in creationism in government. In other words, they believe that the universe and all of the creatures in it could have evolved spontaneously, but that the economy is too complicated to operate without being directed by politicians." End quote. I think that is beyond brilliant, because he's absolutely right, because it is the very same people often who refuse to accept creationism. They believe in creationism when it comes to the economy, which I find a stark contrast. Somehow the miracle of human existence, the miracle of the existence of planet Earth, the random luck, as Stephen Hawking would say, that has caused us to be here, is a result of evolution, of natural selection, all that good stuff, Darwinism. But on the same token, they refuse to accept even the remote possibility that the economy can run itself, provided we merely have a government to stabilize it. And that's the Austrian argument, my school of economics argument, is that so long as things are held stable by a government body, Austrians aren't anarchists. We believe that there does need to be a government in order to promote free trade. Without a government, there is no free trade. It's piracy and looting and tribal warfare. That's no government. You have to have some government. I've never, ever called for anarchy. I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. I'm merely a capitalist. I believe in voluntary action. At my very core, I believe that voluntary action is the most moral action there is. There is nothing more moral than two people agreeing mutually to conduct activity, whatever that activity may be. And I just thought it was a brilliant observation, one that had never occurred to me, that the same people who refuse to even consider creationism, even in tandem with evolution, if you think that can be done, as I do, that those very same people cannot come to grips with the fact that the economy could run without the direction of politicians. So anyway, that's a couple of quick things I wanted to share with you before we get into the nuts and bolts of today's program. And considering that it is a couple of days after April 15th, which was Sunday, so naturally they don't expect you to have your tax return in by Sunday, so I think they give you a couple of days actually if it's on a Sunday. I believe today is what they are calling Emancipation Day, I think, when it comes to taxes. Don't quote me on that. But we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the income tax code. Feel free to give me a phone call. The number is 678-601-8255. We'll be back after the break. It's good to be back in this chair. I'm not nearly as rusty as I thought I would be in trying to gather my thoughts and make coherent statements, so I hope you're enjoying the program so far this morning. Again, the telephone number, if you'd like to call and comment or add to the discussion, please feel free to do so. Anyway, the email, if you'd like to comment, is libertariat@gmail.com. The website, libertariat.wordpress.com. It's a little dusty as well. Have not been very good at updating it lately. School not been fun the last couple of weeks as we wrap up my final semester at the University of West Georgia. So anyway, before we jump into the nuts and bolts, the IRS, tax season, all that, there is one thing I would like to share with you, and that is one more quote from Thomas Sowell. And it's another column from his Random Thoughts. And he says, quote, "In politics, few talents are as richly rewarded as the ability to convince parasites that they are victims. Welfare states on both sides of the Atlantic have discovered that largesse to losers does not reduce their hostility to society, but only increases it. Far from producing gratitude, generosity is seen as an admission of guilt, and the reparations as inadequate compensation for injustices, leading to worsening behavior by the recipients." So while calling people parasites is perhaps not the most politically sound thing to do, I'm not a politician, I'm a talk show host, so I can get away with saying mean things, even though I'm not nearly as mean as I probably could be. I promise, I can be a lot more vicious than I come across as nice on the radio program. Sometimes I do wish I came across as a little more mean, but maybe you like the nice guy, Adam Uglum. But anyway, so to get into this, and the reason I wanted to read that quote to you was because that is what is happening with the tax code in the United States, is that there are parasites in this country who are being convinced that there's this giant gap in wealth disparity, and that this upper echelon of income earners just does not pay taxes, or that they don't pay their fair share. Whatever that fair share is deemable, and who gets to decide that, I think, is pretty arbitrary. And a lot of the time, and I'll give you the pure numbers, there are a very, very slim number of people. I mean, the Forbes 400, I guess, these uber-rich people who really have most of their money in capital gains, which is why they have such a low tax rate. But the people who really just earn money, earn high income, your average, most people out there who just earn lots of money, pay income taxes and capital gains, and their income tax rate is much more normal. It's apples and oranges, what it boils down to. But again, we get back to this talk about parasites. Now, there's a couple of basic facts I would like to share with you. There's about 310 to 315 million people in the country. This year, there were 140 million income tax returns filed. Of those 140 million income tax returns filed, 56 million of them actually paid taxes. That is near as makes no difference, 1/3 of the people who actually file taxes actually having positive tax rates. That, in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, is why the country is absolutely broke. Because half the country is paying taxes, which is probably not too bad, actually. I'm sure there's probably 40 or 50 or 60 million seniors and 30 to 40 million children probably in the country, so that makes a lot of good sense. So here's the thing. 1/3 of the 1/2 of the people who in this country who actually pay taxes, who actually file income tax returns. I'm not talking about the people who don't file income tax returns, which is probably a pretty large number as well. 1/3 of those people are actually having a positive tax rate. Now, basic figures, cited all the time in other talk shows, got to go through them one more time. This is tax year 2009, the most recent year I have on the website. I've got it pulled up anyway. And the top 1% of income earners. Now, to be a top 1% income earner, you don't have to be a millionaire. Most of them aren't, as a matter of fact. Most top 1% income earners in the country earn an adjusted gross income of $343,927. This, according to the IRS. The top 1%, 1 out of 100 people who are paying taxes. Those 1 out of 100 people paid 36.73% of all income taxes paid in the country. The top 5%, which to be in this upper echelon, you have to earn $154,000 adjusted gross income, which I would guess is about 200 plus before all of your deductions, like your mortgage interest deduction, child tax credits, things like that, depreciation, stuff like that. The top 5%, to be in this upper echelon, you contribute to nearly 60% of federal income taxes paid. The top 10%, these are people who are still making well over six figures, pay 70%. The top 25%, people who earn just under $100,000 per year, pay almost 90% of all federal income taxes paid. The top 50% pay 97.8% of all the income taxes paid. The bottom 50 pays 2.25% of all income taxes paid. Most of the people in that bottom 50% have negative tax rates. Negative tax rates. So half the people, at least half the people who are filing have negative tax rates. And a significant portion of those who actually do pay have positive tax rates of 3 or 4 or 5%. When you do your TurboTax online like I did, it actually tells you your tax rate on your entire income. It will tell you on the final report. You may get $500 back from the federal government. That doesn't mean you didn't pay taxes at all. It may mean you just had given the IRS too much money. That's all it means. The U.S. tax code is a complete and utter abomination, and it needs to be gone. Gone, gone, gone. I won't get into my philosophy. Well, I will get into my philosophy about taxes. Here is my basic philosophy on all law, whether it be tax law, whether it be any type of law. I prescribe to the notion that MLK mentions in his letter from a Birmingham jail, that law, to be just law, affects all people equally. If I'm caught doing 37 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone, I should get a $50 ticket. Bobby should get a $50 ticket. Everybody who gets that same violation should get the exact same charge. That is a justified law. The police officer should not give me a quiz and say, well, how much money did you make? Oh, you're in the top 1%. How about $500 for your 2 mile an hour speeding ticket? Oh, you're on welfare. Oh, don't worry about the ticket. No big deal. It's just 2 miles an hour over. Have a nice day, sir. That is not just law, period. That is not just. Law should affect all people equally. Call me a radical if you will. I think if we have an income tax in this country at all, it should be a 10% flat tax on every dollar earned by anyone earning income. And that's it. There shouldn't be any marginal increase in tax rates on anyone. I believe it is immoral to have a marginal increase in tax rates, to have a progressive tax system. I believe it is one of the most immoral things that human history has ever done, is to tax one person more than another simply for making more money. Our system is incredibly unfair to the millions of hardworking people in the middle class and the upper class that drag themselves out of bed and go to work each and every day and try to do the right thing. The U.S. tax system is punitive, it is incredibly inefficient, and it diverts a tremendous amount of resources away from more valuable economic activity. Not only has it chased thousands of businesses and trillions of dollars outside of the United States, the tax code is so complicated it has added billions of dollars in business for the purpose of doing your taxes. Now just think about it. If taxes are a multi-billion-dollar industry for the private sector, what could we better be putting our money to every year instead of doing our dang taxes? The U.S. tax code is 3.8 million words long. If you took all of William Shakespeare's works and collected them together, the entire collection would only be about 900,000 words long. We'll come back after the break. We'll learn some more scary facts about the income tax code before we wrap up the program. You're listening to Adam Uglum here on the Community Voice program. It's tax week, baby. We'll be right back.
I was marching to the wrong drum with the wrong scum, missing out the wrong energy, using all the wrong lines and the wrong signs.
Okay, back from the break. Just about 7 minutes left in the program. Please feel free to give me a phone call. 678-601-TALK is the number. 678-601-TALK. All right, so we're going to kill the music here and get through a couple of quick facts. There's a lot of facts, but here's 23 more that I've found for you with regards to our tax code. According to the National Taxpayers Union, U.S. taxpayers spend more than 7.6 billion hours. 7.6 billion hours complying with the federal tax requirements. Imagine what our society would look like if all of that time was spent on economically profitable activities like, I don't know, barbecuing in your backyard, getting yard work done, working an extra day that week. There's a lot of things you could do with that time. I can think of a million things I could do with 7.6 billion hours. 75 years ago, the instructions for Form 1040 were 2 pages long. Today, the instructions for Form 1040 are 189 pages long, 187 pages longer than they originally were. There have been 4,428 changes to the tax code over the last 10 years. 4,428. It is incredibly costly to change tax software, tax manuals, tax instruction booklets from all of those changes. Not just on the part of the federal government, but think about the companies who do tax returns. They have to change everything every year because the tax code changes that much every year. According to the National Taxpayers Union, the IRS currently has 1,999 different publications, forms, and instruction sheets, all of which you can download conveniently from the IRS website. Our tax system has become so complicated that it is almost impossible to file your taxes correctly. And I go back to what I said earlier. Actually, I was wrong. I was misremembering this article. It's worse. Back in 1998, Money Magazine had 46 different tax professionals complete a tax return for a hypothetical household. All 46 of them came up with a different result. That's right, it's worse than I remembered. In 2009, PC World had 5 of the most popular tax preparation software websites prepare a tax return for a hypothetical household. All 5 of those came back with a different result. The IRS spends $2.45 for every $100 it collects in taxes. That's a lot of money. According to the Tax Foundation, the average American has to work until April 17th. Today, oddly enough. Wow, that is an awesome coincidence. The average American worker has to work until today just to pay federal, state, and local taxes. Back in 1900, Tax Freedom Day was January 22nd. Aren't we a whole lot better off? When the U.S. government first implemented a personal income tax back in 1913, the vast majority of the population paid a rate of just 1%. The highest marginal tax rate was 7%. Residents of New Jersey pay $1.64 in taxes for every $1 of federal spending that New Jersey gets back. The United States is the only nation on the planet that tries to tax citizens on what they earn in other countries. According to Forbes, the 400 highest earning Americans pay an average federal income tax rate of just 18%. Warren Buffett had an effective tax rate of 17.4% for 2010. The top 20% of all income earners in the U.S. pay 86% of the federal income tax bill. You could take away every single penny that every American earns above $250,000, and it would only fund about 38% of the federal budget. You could take every dime that every American earns above $250,000, you'd take care of the government for 4 months. Maybe 5. Maybe. The United States has the highest corporate tax rate in the world, 35%. In Ireland, the corporate tax rate is 12.5%. Guess how many U.S. corporations are moving to Ireland? Quite a few. Some tax havens are doing a booming business in setting up sham headquarters for U.S. corporations. For example, the city of Zug, Switzerland, has only a population of 26,000 people. That's about the size of Carrollton. The city of Zug in Switzerland, 26,000 people. There are 30,000 companies headquartered in Zug, Switzerland. Wouldn't that be grand if 30,000 companies were headquartered in the U.S.? You reap what you sow. In 1950, corporate taxes accounted for 30% of all federal revenue. In 2012, with the same corporate tax rate, corporate taxes account for less than 7% of all federal revenue. You see, ladies and gentlemen, here's the problem with having a tax code that is subject to politicians' whims and will. The minute you let interest groups, lobby, and all of these are fine things, interest groups and lobbyists, I have no problem whatsoever with any of the above. The tax code changes over time as you reward political allies. But when you reward political allies, oftentimes you reward political enemies as well, but you get money either way. Many of the largest companies in this country make huge profits and pay nothing or get money back in taxes. I don't have time to tell you which companies do and don't, but that's the way things are. corporate taxes account for 7% of all federal revenue. We could eliminate the corporate tax code. Nobody would know the difference as far as money goes. It really wouldn't be that big of a deal. Hope you enjoyed the program. Adam Uglum here, back in the newsroom tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. sharp.
You're never more than 10 minutes away from local news and weather.